All right, we're going to get started. Welcome to all of you to St. Paul and St. Andrew. My name is Kay Carpin. I'm one of the pastors along with Lee Matthews. We're thrilled to have you here. Whether you're here physically or on live stream out in the ether, you're very welcome either way. We will be taking questions off of the live stream as well. For our part one of this program on immigration a couple of weeks ago, we ended up with more than 300 people watching online. So you are, that was pretty awesome way to get the word out and start to question these issues. Today's topic is New York City Immigration Crisis, building to action. So we're hoping to take the next steps towards a concrete response and moving towards non-reformist reform. And so my task is simple. I'm to tell you where the restrooms are. They are through that door and downstairs. If you're watching online, I'm afraid you're on your own. You'll have to figure that out for yourself. I want to just point out that we'll have a sign-in code. Is that coming up on the screen? Yes, it will come up on the screen. Oh, and it did come up on the screen. So please take a moment if you haven't already to use that login to sign in, and we would appreciate it very much. All right. To tell us what we're up for the evening is Carol.
Hi, folks. I got to bring the mic down. Okay. So thank you so much for being here. We're really excited for tonight's presentation. This immigration series started as a desire to go deeper into our understanding of how did we end up in this inhumane moment right now. So our first task, as Kay mentioned, was on January 10th, and we were very lucky to have a presentation from Steve Sacco, who is a brilliant activist immigration lawyer. It's okay, take your time. It's on the floor. Forgive me, I'm sorry. So our first task was to find out how did we get here. So Steve's presentation we thought was going to be on the history of immigration law, and it was actually on the history of white republic regulatory law, which really put our learning on a good front, a good foot. One of the phrases that came up during Steve's presentation when we were talking about what do we do next, how do we change this, was the phrase non-reformist reform, which for some of us was new, and for some of us was, oh yeah, I know what that is. So tonight, because that resonated with people, we want to ground ourselves in what we mean when we say non-reformist reform, and why we think it's an important way to organize our work going forward. So a brief little history. In the 1960s, André Gorz was an Austrian-French theorist who was working on dismantling capitalism. And he came up with this phrase, non-reformist reform. And his definition, on the slide there you can see, is a change designed to make a practical difference in the short run, and I think this is the really key part, while also building towards larger transformation. So the idea is don't tweak the system that is oppressing people, make changes so that people get what they need right now, but your goal is always transformative. Your goal is to undo this system that is causing the harm. And that's really key, and it could not be more timely with the latest murder by police of a black man. We hear a lot of calls for reform. We hear a lot of calls for tweaking the system. If we only add this little additional piece to this system that's already causing so much harm to people, we can make change. And that's not really the goal. So following the Ferguson uprising, Mariame Kaba followed this line of thinking. of non-reformist reform, transformative demands, and came up with a list of questions to use in discerning all of the proposals that were flooding out in the wake of Ferguson. Everybody had ideas for how to fix the system, right? But the idea was transformative demands. And I really want to recommend folks check out this book. It's called No More Police. The authors are Maria Mikaba and Andrea Ritchie. She talks primarily about abolition of police and goes into a really beautiful description of non-reformist reform, transformative demands, that the information I'm drawing from tonight is from this book. Really highly recommend it, as I think it would make a great book study for our church. Just throwing that out there. So some of the questions that the organizers in following the Ferguson uprising and the Chicago murder of Laquan McDonald, some of the questions that they wanted to focus on was, does this proposal or does this suggested change provide material relief or reduce harm to people most impacted right now? So is this doing something good for the people who are impacted right now? That was one thing. Does it leave out people on the margins, undocumented people, people with incarceration history? Does it forward a narrative of who deserves change and who's undeserving? Does it pit people against each other and thus protect the system? Or does it point to the problem of the system? Does it expand or legitimize a system that we're trying to dismantle? Basically, are we creating something that we're going to want to take apart 5 years from now? Are we wasting our energy and our resources on building something that is not true to the goal that we actually want, that we're just going to have to take apart down the line? So I do encourage you all to look at this book and keep that thinking in mind. I think that the reason this organizing principle resonated for folks at SPSA in particular is because we talk a lot about wanting to create the world right now that everybody deserves. Everybody deserves to live in a world of justice and righteousness. So the folks that we are so blessed to have with us tonight are doing this transformative work. We're really excited to hear about the immediate work that's happening on the ground, the plans that are being put forward to create the world that we want to see for everybody in the future. And we'll also have a little recap of what's happening right here at SPSA, and of course, action steps for what y'all can do next. So thank you very much for being here. Feel free to put questions in the chat. We have a chat wrangler with a mic who will bring your voice into the room. And we look forward to hearing from our guests. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Carol. That was a great way to get us started really framing non-reformist reform. And I just want to point out for those people who are in the room, there is a one-pager handout on non-reformist reform. If you didn't pick it up on the way in, please take advantage of picking up on the way out. If you're online with us, and you fill out the form that was originally on the screen earlier, then we're going to send that same piece to you after the evening is over. So it is my total pleasure to introduce the three people who are going to be talking with us right now on the panel, and then Rashida is going to be talking to us later on in the evening, so we'll look forward to that. We're going to start with Adama Ba, and I want to introduce you to her a little bit, although she doesn't need a lot of introduction. A lot of people know her already. Adama came to the United States in 1990 at the age of 2. She lived in the States and attended public schools. Then, at 16, her whole world changed. The FBI raided her apartment and handcuffed her along with her father. She was detained, and she was told that she was illegal. Her father was deported. Adama was allowed to stay, but forced to drop out of school to support her family. Now Adama is telling her story, while she's also deeply involved in working to address the plight of others who have experiences somewhat like her own. So Adama, welcome. We are so honored to have you with us. We are eager to hear what you have to say. And I doubt that I have to offer you any prompts, but just tell us a little bit more about yourself, if you would like, and about the people that are arriving in New York City. And Adama, I'd like you to come up to the mic here. Thank you, Jonathan. we'll use the mic for the Q&A, but for the purposes of your presentation, use this mic. Thanks so much.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm short, so thank you so much for having me. As you guys heard, I was formerly undocumented. It actually took me 16 years to become an American citizen. I actually had to sue the federal government to become an American citizen. But in part of my journey, I started to share what it was to be undocumented on social media, on Facebook, Instagram. And I grew a large following on Facebook with people who were like me, who were undocumented, who were struggling, who were trying to figure out what to do next. And I would constantly update them about my life. So once the ankle bracelet was removed from my, after I was released from detention center, I spread it all over the Facebook. Once I got on the no-fly list, I posted that on Facebook too. When I filed a federal lawsuit and got removed from the no-fly list, I posted that on Facebook too. And I grew the audience that needed to hear me, which are people that needed help. But I just didn't want to just tell my story. I wanted to change the system. I wanted to change immigration the way it was, because the people who are making the policies were never impacted the way I was. They were never impacted the way my neighbors and friends were. So I joined this movement and not just advocating, but also teaching others how to advocate for themselves. So I heard about the buses. It first started off, it was a rumor. And the NGOs in Texas were like, this bus coming. And then the people themselves who are arriving in New York City were telling us that buses were coming. So as undocumented or people with green card, we never have the luxury of flying, because flying is an easy way to be detected and be arrested by ICE or immigration. So the bus system has been used for many years. So when I first heard about it, I said, okay, it's time to jump into action. Along the way, I contacted NGOs that I've worked with for years and said, listen, this is about to happen. I need your help. And of course, everybody's like, okay, tell us what to do. But we honestly didn't expect the amount of work that we had to do on the ground. But since I've been undocumented for 16 years, I knew if I was not on the ground, those people were going to go through the same issues that I've gone through. And honestly, they're going through the same exact things that I've gone through. They're having trouble in the shelter system. They're having trouble assimilating to our culture, to our food, understanding our language, getting enrolled in school, getting health care. Things that you would think that are easy and are just go here, just go there, would be easy, has been very difficult. So my goal on the ground is not just to greet them and clap for them and hug them and clothe them, but is actually to listen to them and ask them, what do you need? America is an amazing country. Of course we have our flaws, but I can show you how to be in this country. I can teach you as someone who has been in your boots. And one of the things that I've noticed is that we have a few Hispanic migrants, a lot of actually Hispanic migrants. We don't speak the same language, but we have a shared experience, and that's what made our bond grow even more. But before I pass it on to the next person, I really want to talk about the black migrants, because black migrants are often not spoken about. So the black migrants, once they're caught at the Mexican border or the California border or the Arizona border, they are then put into detention center, and from detention center, and from detention center. They are not released until they pay for a bond, and that bond is almost $6,000 and more. They are then released with an ankle bracelet. Then they are then dropped off at a random location, for example, Louisiana. Random location, Louisiana. I don't know Louisiana very well. And then they have to figure out how to get to New York City or to states where their family or community is. And so, unfortunately, with the Hispanic migrants, they don't have to deal with that. And it's not fair. So you show the anti-blackness just in immigration. And so when the black migrants arrive in New York, the next issue that they have is getting placed into the shelter system. The shelter system doesn't have the languages. They don't adhere to their cultural needs, their religious needs. So then you have us who have to come and advocate for that. So this is a long journey. It's a long advocating, but I'm not doing this alone. I see many faces in this audience that I already know that are also doing this work along with me. So the best advice that I can give anyone who wants to get involved is don't do this work alone. Rely on each other. It doesn't matter what faith, what culture, what language, but we have to help each other. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Adama. And now I hope everybody, both who's in the church, is writing down any questions or thoughts that you have for when we have our Q&A in a little while, and folks online. Please put them in the chat because people are noting them so that your questions will also be brought to the panel in the Q&A session after we hear from Power and Jonathan. So Power, so good to have you with us. Power Malou has been on a journey to connect the many paths he's walked in the service of justice and healing. Using his platform and vast life experience, he strives to educate and guide young activists fighting for racial and economic justice in New York City, Puerto Rico, and around the world. In March 2018, he founded Artists, Athletes, and Activists, a nonprofit organization that takes action to support vulnerable communities by connecting them with critical services. His organization was instrumental during Hurricane Maria, relief efforts in Puerto Rico, in launching the Plant-Based Community Fridge initiative, and most recently, has been on the front lines responding to the migrant crisis here in New York City. Power, welcome, and we look forward to what you have to say.
Thank you for the opportunity. As Adama mentioned, we've been on the front lines, and a lot of times when you are on the front lines, you have no real opportunity to share what you're doing. There are a lot of people that project, a lot of people that say they're doing this and that, but the real people that are on the ground don't always get the opportunity to share their stories because we're so busy being on the ground. That is our duty. We have submitted to our role. We have committed to this role, and we have submitted to our soul. And when we talk about bringing people together, we have to realize that we have an inner guide, and that inner guide is in all of us. It's our intuition, is that gut feeling that we have, and it allows us to get away from the ego system and get with this ecosystem, which means that there's always going to be a crisis. There's always going to be somebody that needs help. And it is up to us to tap into that inner guide to be able to share our resources and be able to admit that we have some type of privilege, but nothing belongs to us. Whatever we have is meant to be shared. And whatever we get into, we have to get into it with that vibe, with that energy, because it is our duty to help each other evolve. Otherwise, we stay stuck. I was very instrumental in the George Floyd protests that happened here in New York City. I was mentoring a lot of the youth that led a lot of those protests. And we were on the ground every single day. For over a year, we were out there telling people why it is important for them to speak out, why it is important for them to come together, and why it is important for them to create a new family, because we are not alone. We may become from different tribes and nations, but we are meant to recognize each other, not despise one another. And as a youth, I always believed in that. Whether it was because there were maybe some type of activity happening in one neighborhood where one person didn't get along with somebody else from another neighborhood, I was always a mediator of sorts. And by default, I became that person that brought community together. And as I grew up, I started realizing that was my calling. I didn't fight it. I was in entertainment, and I still do a one-person play, and I'm still into acting, and I love that part of my gift, but I'm not caught up in what people say, man, you have so much talent, you should be doing this, or you should be doing that. As I started earlier to let you guys know, you have to submit to your soul, because all the answers lie there, not in what people put into your ear. The George Floyd protests was a moment that was to be turned into a movement. And it's been so many years prior to that for us to have an opportunity to change a system. And unfortunately, we got caught up in the distractions again. And that was what I would always say when we were speaking to the crowds and to the people that came out to the protests. Don't allow this to only be a moment. Let it be a movement. This is a way of life. My background is hip-hop music, hip-hop culture. Hip-hop is a way of life. How we live, the opportunities that we have to share, it is a way of life. And I'm hoping that with this migrant crisis that's happening, we don't just let it be a moment. Because what happens is we lose sight of the bigger picture, which is what we heard earlier about this being to create the ripples that will create the waves that would allow the system to come crashing down. But we have to make the small changes. We have to be able to be open and available to suggestions. We have to be able to meet everyone where they are, and we need to have empathy for each other. It is very important for us to convey that message, because it's not all about the rah, rah, rah and being able to just be out there and just making noise. We all have to work together to try to figure out who is in what position and how can we speak to those people to allow them to see that they too are in a position that they've been blessed with, and they should not throw that opportunity away, but rather ask us for the support, and we will give them that support. The same way that we ask for support to make this work sustainable. Adam and I are on the ground every single day. We're answering our phones 24/7. We wish we had more people to help us, but we understand life happens. But for us, this is our calling, and we will continue to do this work. If we can get more support, whether that's financially, we can help to provide other people with a way of life that they actually can work doing something that they love to do and help to continue to impact the world. I'm part of a running community. I'm able to travel around the world and meet different run groups in different countries, like the former Yugoslavia, where I was able to go into an orphanage and support that orphanage because people were crossing over and the parents would not make it, and so the kids were left alone. Through running, I was able to use that platform to raise funds and to raise awareness, the same way I did with Puerto Rico. And the man that's sitting there, Jonathan Soto, has been part of the work that we've been doing in Puerto Rico, using our platform, using the running community to bring awareness. And we did a 5K in Barrio Playa in Añasco, and we were able to raise awareness to what's going on through our running community. I have a boxing gym called Overthrow New York. This is the jacket from Overthrow New York. it's at 9 Bleecker. 9 Bleecker was the former home to the Youth International Party. It was the home, the New York City home base of the Yippies, Abby Hoffman and such. And so we remain true to that, where Overthrow magazine was started. So as an artist, athlete, activist, I am committed, and I will continue to do this work, and I will continue to mentor, and I will continue to share at every opportunity that I get, knowing that none of this belongs to me, and it is just an opportunity for me to help everyone to evolve as a family, as a community. Peace and blessings to you all.
Power, thanks so much for those inspirational words and for the model of who you are in the world. It's great. Again, keep those questions in your mind for as we go forward. But let's move on to Jonathan. So Jonathan is currently serving as clergy organizer for Churches United for Fair Housing. He has a past which has a lot of pieces to it. I'm going to talk about just a couple. Jonathan served as the political organizer for Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, where throughout the pandemic he organized with hundreds of volunteers to provide thousands of hours of virtual home help to public school students in AOC's district. In 2018, Jonathan served as the Associate Vice President of Union Theological Seminary, where he coordinated with students and faculty there to launch Puerto Rico relief efforts after Hurricane Maria and advocacy efforts to protest the U.S.-imposed austerity crisis on the island. Back in 2015, Mayor de Blasio appointed Soto to serve as the Senior Community Liaison for the Mayor's Clergy Advisory Council, where he engaged communities of faith in the formation of city policy and administration of public services. Throughout, Jonathan Soto has been an organizer working with New York City's faith communities to collectively meet the material needs and to transform the material conditions of their neighborhoods. Tonight, Jonathan could talk about many things, but he's going to talk specifically about our homes, our power. This is a very exciting 2023 state policy agenda of housing justice for all, of which he is an integral part. Jonathan, we're excited to hear about Housing Justice for All's platform and anything else that you want to share about non-reformist reform. Welcome.
Greetings. It is an honor and a privilege to be in this sanctuary, a place that literally provides sanctuary for those that have been dispossessed by forces of capitalism, forces of racism, and to specifically name anti-Black racism. And as we see the usurping of indigenous lands throughout this country and throughout this globe. And I'm just honored to be here with Arma and to be here with Power, folks who are at the front lines. And not only being at the front lines causes a wear and tear of our spirits and souls, where there isn't regenerative community. I really honored that you've taken this time to share your experiences. And Nadia joining Council of Churches, who has been very integral to a lot of the efforts and advocacy efforts throughout the state. So I'm just going to briefly reference handouts that are over there. One is a Housing Justice for All handout that outlines the specific bills that are currently taking place and that we're fighting for at the state level. And also, if anybody wants to come to Albany, my organization, Clergy United for Fair Housing, we're doing several Albany trips. So if you're interested in coming any dates or coming individually, organizing a group, free meals, free trips, just let us know or talk to me, please, right after this presentation. And non-reformist reform is really interesting because Albany And all the other places are really stages for that highlight the struggle between these contradictory forces. The contradictions are very clear, and I view my role and I view the role of so many of advocates here to highlight those contradictions, but not only to highlight them, but to resolve them through transformation. The same way that the solution of ending capitalism comes from capitalism itself, paradoxically, I think our goal is to turn the contradictions and find what is the underlying premise that allows us to turn a contradiction into a paradox that allows us to identify what is it that we're missing in this entire stage of conflict, where we have individuals that are unhoused, dispossessed, that don't have access to a fundamental human right. And I think that premise that is understated is that in this state and in this country, it is the worker and the renter that creates the wealth of this society. Finance is a magic hallucination trick to create value and extract. For all finance folks here, no shade at all. But it is the worker and it is the renter that creates the wealth in this society. And Albany, it's really interesting. That is the stage of so many of the conflicts. And I'm always conflicted because I do have analysis, and every time I work with a nonprofit or I work with a government entity that oftentimes feeds into the nonprofit industrial complex, or I may work with the principal or with an elected official that is not perfect all the time, it's very easy to hear the voices of folks that are saying you're not doing enough, you're not pure enough, and you should just set aside, be quiet, and not move and act. And it's very easy for houses of worship to feel that way as well, especially when you're combating fights over property values, landmarking, rezonings, needs to pay the bills. And it's difficult to really move with boldness, to move with courage, but that's why we need to do it together. Because if we, as mentioned, it's not about ego, but understanding the ecosystem and what roles we could play. So that I say, right, we cannot swing at piñatas from far away. And Albany's a big piñata with lots of money that we just need to get a really large stick and hit it and see the equitable distribution and just take care of the processes as everything falls down, that we create systems of care so that distribution doesn't equal the way that the piñata was created. So that 100% of the value is stuck up in an inaccessible way, and when we smash the piñata, that we're able to create a culture, as we're not there yet, but we're creating a culture. We're creating a community that will be ready when the time comes for that massive redistribution that we really need. So specifically, the way that's playing out in Albany for this session, and also in the city council in different ways, are in these bills that are addressing a premise that the real estate lobby and big donors shouldn't be making the laws in this state, but it should be a focus on renters, and it should be focused on those that are currently being dispossessed from their homes in the richest country, in the richest city, in the history of the universe, to the extent that we know, here in Manhattan. It's wild, right? That during and post-pandemic, and it's not post because we're still going through it, we've seen rental rates raised by 100% sometimes, 200% of rent increases that are just throwing people out of their homes. We're seeing the lack of affordability forcing families that have roots in this city and that have created the wealth of this city to be pushed out. And Housing Justice for All, and my organization that I'm working with now, Clergy United for Fair Housing, is pushing for this package of bills. Specifically, here is the package that we're fighting for, and I'll go through them one by one briefly. Good cause eviction protections. What is good cause eviction? Good cause eviction is a bill that's been sponsored by Senator Julia Salazar in the Senate, that's been around for 2 or 3 years and hasn't passed because the real estate lobby doesn't want it passed because it wants to keep its ability to raise rents by 30, 40%. And this bill caps if there is no good cause for eviction, to cap it at 3% increases. The real estate lobby is putting out a false narrative that this prevents any landlord or any person to push someone out for any cause. No, if someone is not paying their rent, this doesn't necessarily address that specific issue. It addresses the issue if there's good cause, and that only under good cause are you able to evict someone, which is something that currently doesn't exist here in this state. So good cause eviction is integral in this suite of bills in order to address the eviction crisis that so many folks are facing. Also, Emergency Tenant Protection Act and reforms, critically important, because that addresses what's called the RGB, or the Rent Guidelines Board. So if you remember, the Rent Guidelines Board is this body of folks from the real estate industry and the tenant industry, many of those folks appointed by the mayor, that decide whether or not to raise your preferential rents and to what degree they could raise your rent-controlled rents. And what's happened, as I think it's a whole other topic, where executives at the city, state, and federal level just have way too much power. We don't have co-equal representation of branches anymore, and the judicial and the executive branch have been overtaken by moneyed interest. So we are trying to push to restructure so that the mayor and the executives don't have a monopoly over appointment power to the Rent Guideline Board, but that the state then has and empowers the city council to be able to appoint members as well, so that we could balance that field as well. Non-reformist reform is not just one dimension of this life, but several, right? It's rent protections for tenants against landlords. It is the power of the executive to be able to determine rent increases, whether preferential or rent controlled. There's a third part here, the social housing development authority, to create this authority that's created really amazing and sustainable opportunities for living and home ownership, and also for social housing, as we see in Mitchell-Lama developments. Mitchell-Lama, state senator way back, ability to provide deep funding and deep investment in social housing. And we've seen the state move away from investing in housing and using the PPP, or the public-private partnership model, which has overtaken and become normative in our society and in all of our housing development throughout the country, which is why we've seen such massive increases ever since this like post-80 PPP Reagan like view just take over. And we need massive investment in social housing instead of massive investment in the force of police, as we see time and time again the priorities of so many governments happening here. For example, we also have like Co-op City, the world's largest housing development in the, I think in the Western Hemisphere. Mitchell-Lama social housing program, right? It has one of the safest, one of the highest quality of life here in the city, with one of the highest densities. And that is all a result of an experiment that took place that we could revive as well. We also have housing access voucher programs. We do have, in many ways, a housing shortage, which in many ways is artificial as well, because we have so many vacancies. We have 60,000, 70,000 vacant units, many of them luxury units owned by multinational corporations, but also very wealthy folks in the international community that are vacant. No one's living there. However, because we live under a system of property law. We're not able to seize them yet. But till we seize them, we need to create voucher systems and create protections so that people accept vouchers, because this crisis of lack of access to affordable housing is artificial, and we need this tool in our toolbox in order to address it. The Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, also another really important piece of legislation that empowers tenants to be able to come together and purchase either their apartment or to be able to purchase collectively at the city level. There's a sister, brother, sibling bill called the Community Opportunity Protection Act, which allows for nonprofits to be able to take over a multifamily dwelling and convert it through a community land trust. Another vehicle, another tool in our toolbox to be able to level the playing field, engage in these non-reformist reforms that attack this hidden premise. I mean, premise is always hidden, but this premise that we have to create laws that benefit moneyed interests, that help developers, that help real estate, and not necessarily empowering the tenant in this really asymmetrical kind of policy battle we have here in the state. So those are some of, at the state level, the bills that we're fighting for. Encourage you all to join us whenever you'd like. Actually, on Valentine's Day, February 14th, we will be going to Albany. March 8th, we'll be going to Albany, and March 14th. And I hope many of you would take us up on that offer, and I'm happy to connect with you if you have other folks that are interested in coming with us, because we need presence in the state legislature. There are lobbyists running around. They are in the ears of all the legislators, and if we're not there in order to be present as well on behalf of our communities, that's one of the main reasons why we always see these bills get really close to the finish line but not pass, because we need to bring in that moral force and moral power. In conclusion, there also is a very important thing that I believe connects to the issues that Power and Adama have been talking about with the migrant crisis, and something that hasn't been stated enough, I believe, especially when it comes to the right to shelter law, is that the city is in violation of the law. The city is in violation of the right to shelter law by forcing people to go to Red Hook and to go to these facilities where there's no privacy, where they're just violating the law. So I'm curious as to why there hasn't been a lawsuit against the city, just to not only clarify the law, but to put that pressure and make that moral issue clear that these facilities are not in compliance with the law. Of course, people are not going to want to sleep in cots in a bunker-style, barrack-style situation when not only is it inhumane, but it is in violation of the law. So it'd be really important to not only supplement and take the lead of folks on the ground that are seeing the conditions and dealing with it day by day, and support and financially, spiritually, this way the efforts, at the same time, parallel, being able to have these legislative, legal strategies to push the issue, to highlight the contradictions, and once and for all change the imbalance that exists as it relates to not only the legislative power, the policy imbalances, but also the human rights violations that are happening. So I would encourage everyone, if you haven't done so, there is a Take Action QR code that you could check out here from Housing Justice for All. and check out the website. There's a faith leader letter that came out. I think we're close to 100 signatures, which is really exciting. It's going to get published, and there's going to be an action happening soon. Nadia's going to speak about it. Rashida is going to speak about it soon. And I think also, if you want to come with us to Albany, Clergy United for Fair Housing, we have these buses that are waiting to be filled for February 14th, March 8th, and March 14th, so that you could join us. So again, thank you so much. Non-reformist reform was really interesting. I'm going to read more about that. So everyone should also take that. And thank you so much for the invitation.
Great. Thank you so much, Jonathan. And Rashida, we're going to save your for when we're talking about next steps, where you can tell us very concretely about what you are working on. So I want to thank you all again. Very different presentations, all very, very important in talking about the human rights violations, the huge injustices that are being done to people every day. So I'm sure this has been stimulating for all the rest of us, and I want to open it up now for questions for the panel from people here in the church or people online. Yes, and now we have the logistical issue of finding the cordless mic. But we want to be able to catch it for the folks who are online as well.
So thank you to absolutely everyone. Your presentations were stimulating, moving, and I am so grateful to all of you for the work that you're doing. Adama, how can people help you?
Can you guys hear me? Yeah. Okay. Honestly, just be available. I think one of the things is that we need advocates on the ground. And one of the things I definitely want to touch on is that people think that we're just advocating for immigrants. We're advocating for everyone, especially when we're dealing with DHS issue. And I'm glad that Jonathan mentioned the unhoused community, because when you see the unhoused community, you wonder why. And as we're dealing with this migrant crisis, we see why. They require such rigorous documents that I don't even have, and I'm sure half of you in this room don't even have, just to get into the shelter system. And they justify these by making policies and laws. So I think what we need is people on the ground who can help us change the system by constantly sending emails. I'm not a protester, I don't believe in that. But those emails really do work. Following up and asking, what can I do, like what you did, is perfect. Just come and help us. We're at Port Authority literally every day.
Power, could I ask you the same question, please? How can we help you?
Well, I'm always going to try to bring in the opportunity to state that we are underfunded. We're not funded at all. We actually ask friends for dimes, nickels, and that's, if you want to look at it in that way. We try to get them involved, and if they can't volunteer, then we tell them that you can at least share some of your earnings so that we can pay for an Uber or a Lyft for a family that's coming from the airport or that needs to be transported, because as Adama mentioned, DHS is an unfair system, and a lot of times they have people on a bed chase. They'll tell them, well, you're in Manhattan on 30th Street, you need to go to the Bronx. And a lot of times the families don't have money to go to the Bronx, and let alone if you're talking about migrants, they don't know how to travel in this system. So we end up having to pay for them to get to wherever they need to go to so that they can be safe. So we do a lot of work where we require our network of friends to donate their time and donate food A lot of organizations that are mobile kitchens have been supporting us, but we would love to be able to support them as well, because it's not fair that they have to pull from their resources to help this crisis. Everyone thinks that everything is fine, or because whatever's projected on the media. The city never recognizes the work that we do in public, but they are quick to do it when we are on calls with them and we're calling them out on stuff and they're trying to quell what we are saying. So these opportunities are important for us to actually share that. And sometimes, I'm a little hesitant because I don't want people to think like, oh, they're just asking for funding. But the reality is that we can't get people to support us on a consistent basis if we don't have funding to do this work. We can ask, and it will be inconsistent, but in order for it to be sustained, we have to pull from the system. And so that is the number one thing that we say that we need, because volunteers come and go, and as I mentioned earlier, life happens and they can't be there all the time. But we do have people that would rather be doing this work and be advocates if they were able to support themselves and actually pay for rent. So that's it.
I just want to follow up on that for just a minute. Is there and thank you for those really concrete suggestions. Is there a social media account that we should follow to see here's where we need people and when? Is there a Venmo that is general that will go towards the needs that you're talking about? Like, how do we actually get the money to y'all?
So our organization is Artists, Athletes, Activists. We are on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. On our Instagram, on our bio, there's an opportunity to click on the bio link, and there you can see our Venmo. We have our main page, which is artists-athletes-activists.org, and there's a couple of different ways that you can donate to our work.
Ekema, do you have a follow-up question to that, or? Okay, so why don't you ask your question, and then we'll go to the folks online. You have one question, okay.
Similarly, and maybe this is more so for Adama, what are ways that immigrants of privilege, like using that as an umbrella term, can be in greater solidarity and support folks that are arriving in buses at the border? It's been my experience as an immigrant of privilege, right? Like, our parents are like, well, we came here the right way, why can't the rest of them, right? And that's a constant learning, I think, me personally, and then in interaction and in relationship with like other immigrants. And when we get here, right, I think it's, we fall into a lot of the patterns of tribalism that are very unfortunate about this country. So like, what are ways that we can like support our people? Because like at the end of the day, right, we are all our people. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts.
I think also definitely sharing people's stories. Often when I talk about immigration, people don't expect me as a woman of color to talk, a black woman to talk about it. They're expecting a Hispanic migrant to be up there speaking. So they're like, wait, you were undocumented? Well, your English is good. Well, you look different. Where did you come from? So you get all these constant questions. So I think educating people. My parents did come to the United States the right way. They came with a visa, and unfortunately, we stayed. Well, not unfortunately, fortunately, we stayed. Fortunately, we stayed. We overstayed our visa, but that was the only way that we could stay in this country. I think a great example is the Afghani family that I met today. He's special forces. And then when the Taliban came, who did they go after? They went after people that supported America. And so he fled. So he didn't come the right way, which is wait in our house until the Americans come and rescue you. Because by then, he said they would have killed me. So he did the journey of going through, I forgot how many countries, but I know when he got to Brazil, that's 9 countries. But he went through that way just to get to safety. And his words were, if I would have waited for the Americans, I would have been dead. My children would have been dead. My wife would have been dead. So he's here. So we cannot judge and tell people what's the right way when we haven't been in that situation, when we haven't been impacted. I am a mother of two. If I had to cross to Canada today to give them a better life, I would do it. And I'm sure everyone in this room would do it. So I think sharing the stories of people that don't look like them and the stories of the people that do look like them is the best way to help. Even when we're at Port Authority, I mentioned we have a lot of Black migrants. Bringing products that are culturally sensitive are perfect. We have a lot of Iranis and Afghanis that are coming. Hey, donate a hijab. That's something that you can't relate to, but you can say, you know what? I could understand. I have a favorite sweater. You may have a favorite hijab. So what color would you like? So I think just definitely sharing those stories of the people. But as Power says, we're on the ground so much, we don't really have time to share those stories. So it's very important to follow our social media, because I do post a lot, unlike Power. I post a lot about what we're doing so people could understand. It's easier for me to post than call everybody and text everybody like, I need this, I need this, I need this, when I can send one post and the whole world sees it.
What's your what do you post under?
My name, Adama Ba. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Adama has been trying to get me to post a little bit more. But one thing that happens is when the migrants would come to Port Authority or wherever we receive them, I'll use Port Authority for an example, is that we would board the bus. And when we get on the bus, I make sure that I let them know that they may face some opposition or some people saying mean things to them. But I assure them that if the people were not born here 500 years ago, then they too are immigrants, and they are welcome here, no matter what they hear, no matter what people may be saying, because earlier we spoke about how people get pitted against one another, and that's one of the main things. And it surprises me sometimes in our own communities, even today, someone who clearly has an accent and clearly came here from another country, and they tell me, why are they continuing to come here? Is there room for so many of them? And I have to correct them, because I don't understand why people feel, they get caught up in a lot of the hype. And I have to remind them, and I say, you know what? I am Puerto Rican. I was born in New York City, but my parents were born in Puerto Rico. I consider myself a second-class citizen. I am an immigrant because I understand when my mother was here, and because she didn't speak the language, she was mistreated. Because she didn't come from this culture, she was mistreated. And I saw that growing up. So I don't get caught up in the notion that because you have a title that says you're a citizen or an immigrant, that pertains to you as a human being, as someone that has a soul, that has a spirit, that we're all connected to, a higher source of energy that we all have to tap into. So I have empathy for those people that get caught up in the hype to say something as mean as, why are they still coming here? There's no room for them. When meanwhile, you too have come here from somewhere else, and you too were welcomed here, or you have assimilated so much to think that you have the right to tell someone else whether or not they belong here. That's a shame on you. And when I tell them with empathy, but I let them know that it's not nice what they are saying and what they are thinking, because we shouldn't be pitting each other against one another. And this government, this mayor has done just that, and it's really disgusting when he says things like, our resources are gonna be cut off, our budgets are gonna be cut because of these people, and also the staff in these housing, in these shelters, they too use that to pit the migrants against the unhoused community that are here in New York City, because they lie and say that these people are coming here taking your resources, or they're getting treated better than you. And it's unfortunate, but we have to pick up the pieces, and we have to undo that nasty work that is being done by this system just because it's a greedy system, and this is how they prevail, by making sure they keep the divide and conquer thing going.
Okay, no, here, yeah, sorry. Two questions from the chat. And there's, so first, Francis asks, can any of the panelists talk about the City Hall's offer of some supportive services to houses of worship that are helping either shelter or provide services to asylum seekers? And, you know, what's your sense of that? If you know about it, are there strings attached? You know, and what might we want to know about that? And if it's okay, I'll just ask the second one, which is Ben's asked, I'd love to hear more on strategies for pressuring City Hall to use vacant apartments for people who need housing. So those are the kind of two questions coming from the chat right now. Oh, and one shout out, which they love the phrase, immigrants of privilege.
Yeah, there was back in 2015-16 at the mayor's office, we had the clergy council at that time had been part of, and I think Reverend Chloe, if you remember, it was open doors. It was like an open doors initiative. They try to get houses of worship to provide underutilized space for housing, and there was attempts, and I think this is something that happens a lot. A lot of the attempts get a lot of press, and they remain attempts. Because it's a branding situation. It's a way of really shifting the narrative a bit when it's really hot. And then what happened was that then Department of Buildings and the Department of Health come in, and they're not willing to do a lot of the accommodations that are necessary from like health code or building codes to follow through. And a strategy that I think needs to happen in order to make sure that it follows through is consistent pressure, and making sure that the media stays on these issues. Because as with any elected official or any principal, it's really the media attention and the negative attention that forces people to move. And it's not because of the media in and of itself, it's because of the people that are putting that pressure. And I was part of that initiative, and I think there was a goal at the time of getting like 500 houses of worship to try to create beds, and ultimately it was around like 20 or 25 because of a lot of those specific hurdles when it came to like coding situations. I think that that's really unfortunate, because there is a lot of potential there, especially when it comes to so many houses of worship that have space and just have physical space in the city. A really scary thing that's happened, and I'd be very interested if there's some planning person that would look this up, but just see the way, especially like in central Brooklyn, southeast Queens, parts of the Bronx and Harlem, so many houses of worship that are getting bought up, and as of right, you know, they'll either maintain the facade and then just create luxury housing. I know there's a lot of situations that are currently that way, so there really needs to be a concerted effort to keep the pressure, and that happens also in partnership with a lot of city council members, especially at the city level, and pressure on the speaker. So the best way, I would say, is getting a group of city council members that are really putting pressure on the speaker to set that stage of conflict with the mayor. We have a budget process that is approaching very soon, so the city council usually votes on its budget around June, and that could be a stage for struggle, and being very strategic on how to elevate the issue but keep the issue going is really important for seeing maximal change in specific situations like that. It is always a struggle because a lot of houses of worship in New York City, especially ones that have space, either have some contract with the city, right? They have a school, that's related to DOE. They have some skin in the game or some situation where they don't want their interests to be perturbed. And I think that's where the moral courage needs to come in sometimes. It's not easy, but I think there is definitely potential there. And hopefully one day we could get there. But I know specifically for that issue, Open Doors, 2016, 2017, and I could send the link. There was a bunch of press on it if you want to share it around. But it was a lofty goal, and it was really short. And it was because of a lot of the coding when it came to health and when it came to buildings, because many of the basements or the other spaces that may be there, you have to have like a shower, you have to, for every person you're going to have in the specific situation, you need to have 24/7 a person on staff, and a lot of houses of worship, as we know, are very understaffed, so you can't have someone there 24/7, but it allows for creative engagement, because you have lots of houses of worship, for example, that have rent schools for their worship, but there's an exemption or an accommodation made there, right? And the city was willing to go to court to allow that to happen. So I think that's something to consider, especially as it relates to ways to get houses of worship involved.
In any
Just to address what you're saying, I think your efforts are not wasted, John, because there are, I know that some of the contracts that are being talked about right now do exactly that, and I think there's a willingness on the part of somebody to relax the codes a little bit in light of what's happening right now, including, this is a good moment, obviously, because of everything outside of Watson. This is a good moment to push on that front.
In any crisis that I've dealt with, houses of worship have been phenomenal in the forefront. And right now with the migrant crisis, houses of worship around the country have been phenomenal and stepping up. And it doesn't matter what religion you are. Example, Louisiana, when the migrants are just dropped off in random locations, there's a church there that actually houses them. But unfortunately, they get thousands of people a day, so they have to rush them out quickly. But literally, they use their church vans, drive around at this bus station that ICE drops them off, picks them up, and bring them back into church, clothe them, and feed them. Here in New York City, you have 12 mosques that are housing migrants in their spaces, but only 4 went public. And the reason is, a lot of the reasons why they haven't went public is all the things that he's mentioned. The code, they don't want to get any lawsuits. They're just afraid to. And it's post 9/11. People are afraid to come out, especially in the Muslim community, and say, yeah, I have migrants in my mosque. So it's been such a secretive thing. So I think with houses of worship, we need to collaborate more and talk more and keep the city out of our conversation and continue to do the work that we're doing. Because right now, frankly, in New York City, houses of worship are doing everything that the city is supposed to be doing. And a secret I'll tell you, every mosque has a shower and we have water because we wash 5 times a day.
So I want to move us along. The conversation is so rich, but I am aware that we're getting towards the end of our time. And we want to give an opportunity not only for next steps, but a little bit before that. A lot of people, both here in the church, but particularly outside of the church, have been very involved in some of the work around that's been centered at this church. So Lee and Kay, I think you're going to do a presentation about that, and then we'll jump into next steps.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody. Brent is the man behind the curtain who is moving the images, so I'm going to be talking to Brent, who you don't see but does exist. So we're going to tell you a little bit about Mondays in the building. Murders in the building films down the street, but Mondays here is murderously wonderful. It's terrible. It's terrible. I have been up and going since 6:30. All right. So on Mondays in this building, with the help of a tremendous amount of collaborative and creative and fabulous people and organizations, we have set about the work of resourcing our newly arrived neighbors. And so we're going to take you through a little bit what that looks like. Next slide, Brent. When folks get here, and this is averaging between 100 and 200 folks every Monday, they're welcomed. You'll see Karen at that table and Kiana from B'nai Jeshurun, another one of our partners. And immediately they're given kind of a number so that we can keep a sense of who is coming for the first time, if they're returning. And they also get a Metro card, which is one of the most needed items that anybody, for the reason exactly that Power was talking about, just literally getting from one place to the next, right? So they come through, ooh, there is no image on the screen. But what you might imagine is that they entered the sanctuary space, which is turned into essentially a fair with stations or booths, if you will. They're greeted by one of our mutual aid partners. So go to the next one, Brent. Thanks for bearing with us. We're the Venezuelans and Immigrants Aid that is staffed by Nayorka and Hector. Welcome folks into community. As Aman was talking, the idea that you have no friends, no familiar culture. Food was one of the main things you talked about. And these folks really connect on that cellular level. Hector and Nayorka are themselves in the midst of asylum, and so can kind of help folks navigate all that is involved in that aspect. Then in the back, I'm looking to where I set up the booths. Justice for Our Neighbors, another partner who is in the house with Paul Fleck right here, one of our lawyers. They work through all of the know your rights, right? How to respond to NYPD and to ICE. That happens every Monday, and then once the first Monday of every month, they're doing change of venues, right? Asylum forms, legal forms, ICE check-ins, court dates, these are extremely confusing for somebody who is absolutely perfect in English and can understand forms. I barely do either of those, so it really does take a translator and a lawyer and a community person who has navigated, and that's the work that JFON is doing. And if you speak Spanish and want to help us, please seek the resources in a bit. Then we're going to go to the next. In the back, over in this area, Westside Campaign Against Hunger sends one of its fabulous benefit specialists up so that they can check out people's parole numbers so that they might be eligible for some benefits right now and just not know it. So much of this is correcting misinformation and getting them hooked up to things that they do have right at their hands that they have no idea. So Delilah here in the picture is trying to get people signed up for SNAP. If they have US-born kids, and also discounted MTA cards, which again is like very, very needed. Next slide, we go to hospitality. Annette is in the house and at the table. B'nai Jeshurun sends over some amazing food, and we add to that, and they can have some snacks and just hang out. Half of the thing is, if you're not in the shelter space and your kids are not in the school, there is nowhere to go. And so just being able to hang out, like I was tracking where number 1 on a particular Monday was, and I said to Carol, that woman in the white coat has been here for 2 hours, right? And we were just making sure that we were flowing, but really it showed us that she wanted to be here. She wanted to hang out, she wanted to eat, she wanted to have a restroom. That wasn't somewhere that she was looked at as something other than just a person who wanted a space to be. So the hospitality corner is a huge part of the Mondays in the building. Going to the next, oh, maybe not. The big blue screen would be the Church for the Poor, if you could see it, with Sister Arelis, who is one of our collaborators in our larger faith community. Oh, hi, Arelis online. And she really is just a one-woman resource herself, but to connect folks on that spiritual level, right? A lot of the work that they do at Church for the Poor is to tell their stories, right? They do share their stories. They are sacred texts, and they are being written right now, and they need to be shared and listened to. So the work of Aurelis is really to gather folks so that they can do that, so that they can pray and sing and share stories. Then we're going to go to the next slide. This is our essential goods line, which at any given moment has the things that we're hearing from folks that are arriving and folks in the shelter that they're telling us that they need, right? So gloves, hats, socks, toiletry kits. This is constantly rotating depending on the word that we're getting. And this needs a lot of hands. So you'll see a lot of very awesome people standing there. Then we're going to go to the next. In the balconies of the church on Monday afternoon, under the fabulous leadership of Julie Tulloch, who's also in the house, we have to pack these welcome backpacks that then get sent through our other mutual aid partner, La Mirada, in the South Bronx, out to the shelters that they are visiting, where they're also taking food. Remember, the food that is being provided in the shelter system, when it is provided, which is ridiculous times, it doesn't work for anybody's schedule, much less kids and families, it's atrociously bad. It's making people sick. And then it's just culturally not what they're familiar with. It isn't comforting. So La Mirada is taking that food that is meaningful, that is a touchstone, that holds memory and connection into the shelters with these backpacks that are packed by loving hands and so many volunteers and partnering organizations. The next slide, you're going to see the clothing corner used to be here, and it exploded. So it has a whole room on its own under the guidance of, there's Susie on the right, many, many other people, and our Saint Fatima here. And that is lovingly being cared for and ushered into its new phase of explodedness with Open Hearts and the JCC and B'nai Jeshurun and Rodef Shalom and others. So we're very excited about that, to meet the continuing needs of clothing and essential goods, because that is something that folks really do continually need. Next slide, maybe, if it comes to us, maybe it won't, is that this kind of project, I offer it up to you in this way so that you understand it's just expanding and evolving. None of this is set in stone. We're just listening. Whatever people need, we're trying to connect them to other places that are doing the work or bring them in-house. So some of our new partners that you're going to see coming in, the Children's Aid is joining us, Urban Justice Center's Domestic Violence Project, Single Stop Healthcare, and maybe somebody else in the ether or here in the room has a place that we can connect and resource together, so contact me. Next one. Oh, Brent, you came back. Good job. Even though it wasn't a Monday in the building, there's lots of things that we're doing to connect with that same partnership and all of those relationships represented on the Mondays, even if it's on Tuesday, which was today when we were at the Watson. And we're going to hear Rashida talk about what was happening there and why we all gathered. But the point is that the partnerships formed to serve our newly arriving neighbors also can be transferred to responding to things and crises in the moment, right? So it's not just that we're resourcing migrants and people that are coming in, it's that we are drawing all of our acumen together. That can be deployed when it's needed. We're going to go to the next slide. And if you want to be a part of any and all of this, obviously contact me. We would be thrilled to have more partners in this work, but also you can sign up on Lots of Helping Hands, which is how we're organizing our volunteer bases. And you saw, so briefly, you saw our 5 guys who are here living in Shelter Sanctuary, and you can also cook some meals for them, and you can get to know them when you're here on Mondays too, as they come in and out. There's so much, right, that happens in this building, and many other houses of worship are doing the same type of thing, so we put it forward as a model. You know, our sister congregation, Judson Memorial, is doing this very same thing on Mondays, just farther down south. So this can be replicated, and we offer it up as a part of our collective witness and faith imperative to get involved. And now I'm really thrilled to introduce you to Rashida Tyler, who has been so patiently waiting and right in front of you this whole time. Come on over. Rashida is the Deputy Director of New York State's Council of Churches, and I just found out that she's in week 2 of work. So, I mean, she is on it, right? She is on it. She was with us today. She'll talk a little bit about what happened at the hotel and another way that we can support housing justice for all in its legislative agenda. Come on over.
Thank you. So I think I'll say I claim to be the shortest one here. I'll take that title. So thank you so much, for inviting us here. It is such an honor to be on the panel with Adama, with Power, and Justin. They are coalition partners and people who the Council of Churches looks up to, a collaborative partnership around the state. The New York State Council of Churches represents 9 Protestant denominations, over 7,500 congregations across the state. And one of our main goals is to unify and bring people together, which is really what we saw at the Watson today. We saw partner organizations who came out to support the asylees who were being removed from the Watson Hotel, moved to the Brooklyn Naval Terminal, where they're probably going to have to move from again in a few months when the cruise ships start using that terminal. And to shuffle people around, to not recognize their humanity, the ability and the need to have some stability, especially after coming to the U.S. and seeking our harbor here and safety here among us, is absolutely tragic. And the way we respond and the way that we treat our neighbors who have sought our help is a reflection on our society, is a reflection on the city, on the state, and us as individuals. And we have a responsibility to stand up and to really make sure that we are amplifying the voices of those who are in the situation, those who are directly impacted. That is a duty that it falls on us. And when we have our privileges, as someone mentioned, being someone who is part of a privileged set of those who have immigrated here, we use our privilege to help those who do not have it. And without that, there is no point in having privilege. So on February 27th and February 28th, the New York State Council of Churches is holding its annual Ecumenical and Interfaith Advocacy Day. This is where we are asking people from all over the state, faith leaders, to come to Albany to raise your voices together. We advocate for the Housing Justice for All platform, many of the same bills. We advocate for bills that help everyone, regardless of their immigration status. So we are supporting housing access vouchers for all, meaning that they do not discriminate based on immigration status. So if you are undocumented, you too would have a housing voucher and be able to access permanent housing. That's very important because, being in a society that has so many resources, we can't cherry pick who gets to be deserving of those. And we're often sliced and diced into these, discrete segments of our society: veterans, teachers, artists, and special privileges are allotted to them while withholding from others, which creates acrimony and separation, which is actually a device of the system used to control and used to separate. So instead, we choose to unify. One of the most radical acts that we can do is to unify and to advocate for everyone, regardless of if you've been here 2 days or if you've been here 2 decades, to advocate for you and to bring you into the fold. So that's really what Interfaith and Ecumenical Advocacy Day is about. You're welcome to come join us on the 27th. It's an evening, our reception. It starts at 6:30 p.m. The Advocacy Day starts at 9 a.m. on the 28th, and I will be doing a lobbying training, which I have had some experience in lobbying, but I'm also someone who is directly impacted and has been able to go through these systems, to go from the Prince George and Martinique here in New York City all the way through Albany and landing up at the New York State Council of Churches. So able to see all of these systems at function, able to work down in the downtown in the law offices where they're doing O2 visas. So there are different systems of how people get here. If you have enough money in your bank account, you don't have to, go through this regular route. You get to have people vouch for you and say, you have this skill or this item that we want here, and you get a silver way in to the U.S. or to other places. So being able to see all of those systems at play and being able to say, the reason that we're standing here, the reason that we're standing together is because we will not be separated. We will not be divided. So I get carried away in these situations sometimes. I'm sure I'm supposed to be here like 5 minutes, but that was really the heart and the spirit of being at the Watson today. Having people who a lot of folks would say didn't have a voice, they don't know the language, the systems here. Having people who do stand up and unify and bring whatever resources that they have to bear for them, that is the point of faith. That is the point of a faith community. And having that ability to put that into action today was beautiful. To have a bus waiting there ready to load people on and have police lined up to enforce the status quo that serves to disenfranchise those who need the most was disheartening. And you could see really what those who've come to this country to seek help are up against. We do hope, and we work with everyone, so we do hope that Mayor Adams is able to identify and find resources that help our neighbors who are seeking asylum. We hope the governor is able to do the same as well. We try to unify everyone, and we're in all different spaces, but pulling people together at the same time. So, other things that we're advocating for are right to counsel. In addition to being on my second week on the job, I was a tenants' rights organizer and a housing organizer, and I have stood in court when people don't have an attorney, and I'm also a paralegal, so I haven't been able to speak, but I've been able to whisper in the ear of people what they need to say, and it's made the difference between evictions and people being able to stay in their homes. I come from Ulster County and the city of Kingston, where we have a vacancy rate of under 1%. We have a rent burden where people are paying over 55% of their incomes, over 30% of people, and fast people are being pushed out, and prices are rising. And we have good cause eviction in Ulster County. We have the ETPA. And so these are things that we wish for the whole state to enjoy, but it's still not a substitute for people coming together in action, because as fast as the system gets put in place to help people, there are other forces working to dismantle and undermine. So we have to be working together, landlords, tenants, homeowners, building owners, everybody together in order to actually affect and impact the system. Other things that we do at the council, and really the interfaith partnership for affordable housing, in addition to being the deputy director, I'm also the project manager for that, for the partnership. And one of the things we have is a pre-development program, so helping congregations to develop their properties so that they can build affordable housing. Because if you create your own market where you have, again, people who have vouchers and they face discrimination in this market that we currently have, to create a new market where those are welcome is revolutionary and can start turning the tides. So there's a lot more to say, but I turn into a pumpkin at 8:55 and have to head back on the Amtrak. So I want to say thank you very much for inviting the council, and this has been a wonderful evening, getting to connect.
Thank you so much to everybody who shared from your hearts and your souls today. And thank you, everybody, for your patience, for all the folks who are still with us. I do appreciate just a moment or two more. I want to recap some things that really stood out to me. Maybe they did to you as well. I invite you to share in the chat if there were key phrases or ideas that you heard that just made your heart a little warmer. For me, one thing I heard was create a new family. We won't be divided. And those are really powerful ideas. And that's what community is, right? And that's what we have an opportunity to do. So that's exciting and that's hopeful in this time when we can be so despairing. That's hopeful, that's powerful, right? I also want to raise up a little bit more information about the Watson. They have posted some pretty current requests for things. I want to encourage folks to follow opencollective.com, South Bronx Mutual Aid, Artists, Athletes, and Activists, and Adama Ba. If you're not on social media for anything else, get on social media for this and get this information, because as Adama said, she can put one post out and not have to email 1,000 people, right? We don't have to all call Lee and say, hey, what's happening right now? Check your phone, okay? So let's get on board with that. There are also opportunities for Venmo donations and things that you can check in people's bios and just go directly to where the need is. I also want to highlight that what's happening at the Watson is not people coming in and saving people. What's happening at the Watson is people resisting, is people joining together and saying this is unacceptable for us as human beings and we refuse. And that is something that we should be standing behind and supporting and helping empower as much as we can. It's not our place to go in and save anybody, but when we see folks joining together and saying this is what we want for our lives and this is what's not okay, those are the stories, like we've heard, need to be lifted up, need to be respected, need to be listened to, and need to be asked, how can I help? What can I do? From back here in my spot, behind you, okay? Are there any other websites, hashtags, things, email addresses that we want to just raise up again? Is there a website for y'all?
New York State Council of Churches, so we're
nyscoc.org. nyScoc.org. Oh, we have a slide. Thank you, Brent. For Rashida, for New York State Council of Churches. Check out their Albany days, check out their advocacy days in Albany, also Housing Justice for All.
Yep, and we have postcards that you could pick up right there.
So folks who are here in the room can pick up a postcard for their advocacy days. And for folks who are online, what's the website I can send them to? It's there. Okay, check it out on the slide. Housing Justice for All, our platform.
It's online.
It's also online. Okay, awesome. So there are things to do. Check out lots of helping hands. Join in, volunteer, help out on Mondays. It's amazing, it's invigorating, it's life-giving, and it's positive. Check out these folks and support them where you can. Do your best. Do your best for your new family. We're all worth it. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.